Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. I'm actually going to take a seat, but I'm so glad to have you all here and to be here at CES. I was actually here last year, and I left thinking, what if we could harness all of this creativity and talent and innovation by focusing on thinking about what we could do to make the world better for working people and for working families. And by asking that question, how does that affect or change not just how we use AI, but even what AI gets developed and for whom and by whom? So I am so thrilled to have a distinguished panel of 3 experts from different sectors to talk about that with you all. And I'm going to ask them to come up here while I introduce them. So come on up. AFL-CIO President Liz Schuler. Woohoo. President of the American Medical Association, Jesse Ehrenfeld. And we have Kathy Baxter, who is the Principal Architect for Responsible AI and Tech at Salesforce. And I'm just going to start by saying a few words about how we see this moment at the US Department of Labor and in the Biden-Harris administration. We all know, and you're going to talk about it, and you're experiencing it in your worlds, and you are, it's really infused throughout this gathering, this CES conference, that AI has enormous power. It has enormous power both to enhance opportunity and prosperity, and also to be harmful. And the question is, which of these paths are we going to choose, and how do we choose it? And in what ways, it's not like a linear, a choice between one or the other. We make choices every single day that affect who benefits, who gets hurt, who gets included, and who gets left behind. And so, to me, this question of how do we develop AI in a way that benefits workers is a key foundational question for all of the things that we're talking about throughout CES. One important part of it is that the answer is not preordained, right? It's not like the robot apocalypse is coming and we've all got to just buckle up and be ready for it. There's choices that are made by everyone in this room, by developers, technologists, by labor leaders and workers, by consumers, and by government that are going to affect the answer. So with that, whether AI is going to hurt or harm, and who it's going to hurt or harm, and how do we choose a path in which technology and all of the good things and innovation and talent are being used to make life better for people is really the question that we're going to tackle here. We also know that workers are anxious about AI. Surveys show that workers have what's been called FOBO, fear of becoming obsolete. And while AI has created, and we've talked about this, new job categories, there's also displacement and change in the workplace, and those are real. And how do we also make the right choices so that we're sure that what happens as we continue down this path of radical and enormous change in technology, that we do right by working people. So in this moment, many people are asking, how is AI going to help workers? And that's the question that we're going to pose here in this panel. So let me start with a lightning round. 30 seconds to ask each of you to answer the question, can you name one hope that you have for the impact of AI on workers, and one worry that you have for that impact? And Jesse, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Well, thanks for having us, Secretary. It's a pleasure to be on stage with such esteemed leadership. My hope is that AI in healthcare can alleviate the burnout and the pressure that we've got on the workforce. And, we need to let our healthcare teams get back to doing what they do best, which is getting in front of patients and getting out of the mundane things like administrative paperwork, dealing with prior authorizations, insurance hassles. That's my hope. My fear is that we lose trust in these systems because of bias or design flaws, and that we actually hurt patients or we hurt healthcare workers because of challenges with how their data is managed.
I agree with Jesse, and want to say thank you, Madam Secretary, because you are an advocate for workers and bringing voices to places like this, and I just want to say thank you for that, thinking of us. My hope is that technology makes jobs safer, easier, less stressful, and less backbreaking in some cases, and that the productivity gains that we're all hoping will exist if we're using more technology and freeing up people's time, that we all share in those productivity gains, and we can work less. How about that? And then my fear is, as I was in the show, the pace and the scale of change is outrunning us, and that is, in terms of our jobs, in terms of our civil rights, in terms of our democracy, our privacy, et cetera, it's getting away from us, and it's too fast, and we're not prepared for the guardrails that we need.
Kathy?
So for myself, I think one of the things I'm especially hopeful for is that we can use AI to personalize learning, and that people will be able to develop new skills even faster than they can before, because the AI is going to create a much more personalized experience. My fear, however, is that we are going to lose this onboarding, this kind of apprenticeship experience as new people are entering the field. At the beginning, our host introduced that he has 2 kids. My daughter is about to start college, and she wants to go into journalism and psychology. And I worry that with AI, a lot of these entry-level tasks that people develop as they start learning whatever the skill it is, whether it is computer science, writing, medicine, that AI is going to automate many of those fundamental tasks that you develop as you're starting to learn that career, you're starting to develop that skill. And so how do we ensure that we are able to automate away the mundane or unhelpful kind of tasks and enable doctors to be doctors and writers to be writers, but we don't lose that learning experience, that ability to really be able to capture that foundational experience, to make mistakes, learn from it, and then iterate again.
So Kathy, I'm going to stick with you to ask you a follow-up question to this, which is, in your role at Salesforce, even in your title, you guys are really leaning into responsible AI, what you have in the past called ethics by design. I like that idea of by design, right? That really embraces the idea that we can choose the future that we're building. So tell me more, like, what does it mean to be responsible in AI? How do you define responsible AI? And can the ethics by design approach address the worries that you and Jesse and Liz have articulated about the impact of AI on workers?
Absolutely. So for almost a decade, we have been thinking about how we at Salesforce create this technology in a way that is safe for everyone. In 2016, I published our first trusted AI principles, and the #1 principle is responsible, protecting human rights and the data that we are entrusted with. And so we always begin by asking not just, can we do this, but should we do this? And we ask many of the same questions you asked at the beginning, Madam Secretary, of who benefits and who pays? Who is this really designed for? Who's being left behind? So as we're thinking about applying AI and how everyone is impacted, it is critical that we make sure all voices are part of those conversations, that we are actively monitoring when AI goes out into the world, who is being harmed, and then offer immediate redress and remediation, and then update those AI systems. If we find that it's causing harm, we need to fix it, and we need to continue iterating on it. If technology does not leave us better off because it exists than before, we should not be using that technology.
Thank you, Kathy. That feels like a good segue to a question for you, Liz. And I've heard you speak so powerfully about one way to really ensure that AI continues to be equitable and beneficial is to make sure that workers have a say in how and when AI is deployed. And this issue has come up in some high-profile ways, from healthcare to Hollywood in the last year. So what does it look like for workers to have a say? And can you talk about how collective bargaining gives workers a seat at the table when decisions about AI are made? And then what do you think should happen in the large majority of workplaces where there isn't a collective bargaining agreement or a union? How do we have guardrails in those situations?
A lot to unpack in 3 minutes or less, right? And that term FOBO kind of cracked me up because it is this fear of being obsolete, but the key word being fear. That our data shows that 70% of workers believe that their jobs are threatened by technology. And so no matter what we think up here on the stage or in this room about technology and its impact on work, talk to your barista. Talk to the person who is actually keeping the lights on in this convention center, who is driving the bus, who is taking us to this show. Those are the people who we are going to need to make sure are educated and know the potential of what this technology can do. And so I think that fear is a powerful driver, and it can be very destabilizing. So that would be one message that I would leave people with, is that if we don't tackle that fear, we are going to see more and more unrest in this country, just like we did on January 6th, when people feel disenfranchised, when people feel left behind. We had deindustrialization of the Midwest. We did it badly when manufacturing left the country. We have the chance to get this right and make the right choices, as you said in your opening. And so with every industrial revolution, workers have been along for the ride and made it happen. I come out of the electrical industry, utilities. Electricity was the big, bad, dangerous technology of the time. People died making those power lines possible. But until unions came along and actually helped pass government regulation to make it safe and be able to harness it, it was a technology that could go horribly, horribly wrong, and did. So we're on the front lines of it, and as you said, Madam Secretary, incorporating worker voices in the development of technology on the front end, not just when it's implemented, is critically, critically important, no matter what type of technology we're talking about. And co-creating it so that workers are at the table using their expertise, using their experience and knowledge is so critically important, and that's where this tool of collective bargaining comes in. And not many people know it still exists because unions are now less than 10% of the private sector workforce. And this is a tool that can be modernized, where labor and management come across the table and talk with each other about how to use technology responsibly, how to use it safely. And so we have great examples. I was just across the way at the Horseshoe Hotel at our summit talking about writers and actors, their language that they got in their contracts, so that writers can actually be defined as humans first. Sounds basic, but then have protection so that they don't have to use ChatGPT to write their scripts. That was done through their contract. Obviously hotel and housekeepers. We know that algorithmic management is happening, where housekeepers are pushing heavy carts through different floors to chase the high rollers rooms first, even though it doesn't make sense to clean rooms on different floors in different corners of the hotel. That's done because of a different way of prioritizing the work. That does not make sense if you don't listen to the workers. So there are examples after examples of how collective bargaining can actually bring that worker perspective and make it a win-win for workers and employers and our country, frankly, because we need to have that worker-centered approach.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much. Jesse, so healthcare is one industry where AI is growing especially quickly. You've already alluded to this. And the promise of AI seems especially bright in many ways, right? From improved patient outcomes and diagnoses to personalized medicine to the accelerated development of certain drugs. At the same time, we have seen, coming out of a pandemic especially, right, a great demand for doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers. And that is only going to grow as our population ages. So do you think that AI can and should complement existing healthcare workers, or is there a danger that there'll be displacement and job loss? And tell me a little bit about, the quality of the jobs, especially in light of the rapid change in AI.
All great questions. And so the AMA has promulgated this concept of talking about AI as augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence, because we ought to be boosting the capabilities of our healthcare teams, our physicians, our nurses, other people who are a part of delivering healthcare in America today to help them reach their fullest potential, not replacing them. And it's interesting, this whole concept about fear. We did a nationally representative sample of US physicians in August, and 40%, 4 out of 10 US physicians today are equally excited as they are terrified of AI. And we need to make sure that we have a regulatory framework and we have an approach from government and industry working together to make sure that we have tools that we trust. And if we lose the trust of consumers, patients who are on the receiving end of the diagnostic modalities that are being improved, if we lose the trust of the healthcare teams that actually have to walk into an operating room and use a device that has an AI algorithm in it, then there will be a huge setback for what we have to do, which is improve the efficiency and the ability of our healthcare system to function. We've got a healthcare system in crisis. Has anybody here tried to find a new primary care doctor lately? Yeah, good luck, right? And that problem isn't going to be solved overnight by expanding our training programs, expanding nursing schools and medical schools and residency programs. We need to do those things, and we're appreciative of any federal efforts to help with that, but we also need to use these technologies to re-engineer how we deliver care, and make it ways that's more accessible to a broader range of patients, and make it more affordable, but also make sure that we have the physicians and nurses and healthcare teams' voices at the table as these technologies are being designed so that the technologies are an asset, not a burden. We've learned that lesson, unfortunately, in difficult ways with electronic health records, the #1 dissatisfier of healthcare teams for many, many years running because they weren't usable. They were painful, they were difficult, they weren't implemented well. We can't let that happen with the AI digital health technologies that are coming online.
Right, so everyone has talked some about both the promise and the peril, right? I wanted to give you all a chance to react to what you've heard from one another, and please jump in. But I feel like some themes are obviously trust, right? Everybody sort of mentioned it's trust both in terms of whether AI sort of reinforces things that are bad, bias, exclusion, those kinds of things, but also trust in terms of, I think, Kathy, you were saying, if there's harm, then we need to correct, we need to adjust. But that sort of raises something that Liz talked about, which is like, things are happening so fast that sometimes there's once it's out there, the adjustment part, right, it becomes sort of a challenge. And so how do we think about how to ask the right questions at the front end so that we don't put things out there that are harmful? But anyway, I think that those are really hard pieces about all of this. What did you hear from each other that you'd like to react to?
Well, I think we have to take a look at the incentive structures that are at play, that companies have when they are building and implementing any technology, including AI. All of us want to ensure when we go to a browser that it's going to give us the most accurate information. But compared to the B2C, business to consumer environment, in the enterprise environment, companies have always demanded that the technology that we offer to them is safe, that it is accurate. This is not something that you get bonus points for. It is just table stakes. And so from the very beginning, as we started developing AI, we had to ensure that we were that we had every effort in place that this would be accurate. It would be assessed for toxicity and bias, that there would be a human in the loop to be able to catch when things go wrong. And so I think what we need to have is that kind of safety culture that exists in most regulated industries right now. we can all walk into a grocery store and feel reasonably sure that whatever we buy, we can eat it and we're not going to have food poisoning the next day. Or when we go to our pharmacist and they give us a prescription, we're not going to die the next day. Or we get on an airplane, though that's maybe not the best analogy in this moment in time, but mostly still the airline industry is safer than driving your car. But we have a level of trust there because regulations have required that there be a safety culture, that just as part of the process that companies are assessing for harm, that they have to monitor for harm, and when they find harm, that they address it. So I think the AI industry needs to take a page out of the medical industry, out of the transportation industry, and apply it to how they are working, because safety should be table stakes, not icing on the cake.
And I would say a big component of how we build that trust and is baked into that ethical framework, certainly from our perspective in healthcare, is transparency. Yes. You know, if I walk into an operating room and I turn on a ventilator, I'm an anesthesiologist, by the way, I turn on a ventilator and there's an AI algorithm built into it that's going to wean the patient and change, settings, and I don't know that there's an AI algorithm that's doing something. How on earth, as the human in the loop who's supposed to supervise and correct problems, can I adjust that? And this is a lesson that I think we need to learn from aviation. When you look at what happened with the 737 MAX several years ago, the two airliners that we lost, it was an AI safety system that actually caused those planes to go down. The challenge there was that the pilots had no awareness that there was this new AI safety system. It was not in the operations manuals. There was no training given to those pilots. We can't make that same mistake in healthcare or, frankly, any other industry where we expect operators to be able to manage these systems that we are building with this complexity. So having transparency is different than explainability. You know, I may not know what the deep learning is doing, but I ought at least to know that the algorithm exists and that it's influencing the output of a particular system.
Having a human in the loop does no good if the human doesn't know what's going on. A human in the loop provides safety only when they are empowered, and I think you touched on the empowerment earlier. If the human does not understand what's at play, how it's working, then it just becomes a rubber stamp and in some cases can actually turn deadly.
And the accountability piece, right? That we have to have a watchdog that, who is going to be responsible for making sure that what companies say they're doing is actually what they're doing. And I think the profit motive, of course, is baked into this, where a lot of technology then enables, we're chasing the dollar instead of who are we making this technology for. And as I was looking at CES, some of the displays, I saw a healthcare technology that was supposed to, you're supposed to be able to upload a picture of yourself, and it will diagnose if there's something going on with you based on how your skin looks, based on if you're sweating, if your eyes are looking a certain way. And I can see the bias that can creep in automatically with that. But you cannot substitute professional judgment. And we run so fast and break things to try to get these technologies out there. There is nothing wrong with hitting the pause button and saying, A, is this even necessary? B, do we have the safeguards built in before we put this out into the world and start a spiral that we can't, put back in the bottle?
And you have to know what questions to ask to be able to detect true AI technology from snake oil or from, phrenology. So we saw a few years ago AI-based hiring that would similarly, it would analyze your face and it would detect from your cadence of voice, your eye contact with a computer monitor, what your EQ is, what your leadership potential is. And it absolutely does not work for people with different accessibility issues, people on different end of the neurological spectrum. It's snake oil, and yet these companies do an amazing job of selling this. My daughter was actually flagged for academic dishonesty in her AP Lit class that she had used ChatGPT to write her essay. She hadn't. Unfortunately for the school, her mama knows about this technology and had a whole conversation and educated the school about how this technology really works and the difference between plagiarism detectors and AI detectors, and so was able to get that reversed. But when you've got not only an F on an essay because you've been wrongly accused of cheating, but also if you get a flag of academic dishonesty, you can lose a college scholarship. Like, the repercussions of this may seem trivial to the person who is flagging you, but it has real impact. So whether you lose a job, you lose you don't have an opportunity to speak with a human during the hiring process, all of these things really matter. And so if you don't understand the technology, you don't know what questions to ask, you don't know how to tell snake oil from actual good technology.
I just have to interject. The AMA got its start in 1847, stamping out snake oil and quackery. And I feel like it's come full circle with misinformation, disinformation online, and digital tools that actually don't work. And we have to make sure that we have products that are safe and effective, and we appreciate what the FDA is doing to try to make sure that through their regulatory framework that happens. But understanding, how do I know if this thing actually does what it's going to say it's going to do, is a fundamental question that's not resolved.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to ask, because all of you also touched on this, which is sort of the role of government, right? You just talked about the FDA, Jesse. Kathy, you mentioned, this idea that somehow, like, regulation there's a role for regulation, I guess I'll say, right? And Liz, you mentioned this earlier too, that, at one point unions worked with government together to pass worker protections that helped to take a massive change in the way we work, and make sure that it was safe. So what is the right role for government? This feels like both a moment to ask it that is right, but also maybe a moment that's a little bit behind for the reasons that you said, Liz. But it's certainly something that and everyone in this room I think knows that we're thinking about, right? And there's been a call for it, but at the same time, there's lots of people who think, well, if we overregulate, then we hinder innovation. So what is the right thing that you'd like to see when it comes to regulation? And what is the right way for government to promote both innovation and worker well-being at the same time and safeguard against the harms that you're talking about?
Well, I think there is a real need around data privacy, which I'm sure is it's not rocket science. And the way data is used and how it's gathered. I mean, Amazon to me is the poster child for how workers are being surveilled, being, time off task, wearing digital technology on their bodies that measures every movement. Last year I saw a technology that was a defense technology where it's now being used in poultry plants, where if a worker's on an assembly line and wipes their brow, they can actually be disciplined or their pay be docked because of the minute seconds that are off task or whatever. So I think that obviously these privacy and data rules about how that information's gathered, how it's used, but also thinking about training. And as we said, as these technologies develop, workers need to be on the front end of how they get into pathways to the next big thing. So if their job is actually being displaced by technology, that we are actually actively working to find that next pathway and provide the training. The government used to be the one who would provide the training. It got then, defunded over the years, and companies were left with the responsibility for investing in training. We are now at a moment where we need a massive public investment, similar to the climate debate around just transition and how we make workers' lives less disruptive, give them those pathways to training, provide resources and supports to bridge them to that next job, potentially to retirement, whatever it takes. But I think there's some massive, massive disruptions in our future that if we don't figure out how we invest as a country, we are going to be in a whole lot of hurt.
I would echo that. We are certainly very supportive of the executive order that came out at the end of last year that I think is taking an important first step to reassure the public that the government is taking appropriate steps to mitigate risk. But that is not a substitution for real regulation. And our primary priority would be around data privacy, and healthcare workers, all workers should have the right to opt out of how their data is stored and collected. We need to make sure that when corrections need to be made, that we have the technologies and the tools to do that. We need to make sure that people have an understanding through a national privacy framework of how their data is being stored and collected and used in different AI algorithms. And right now, we just don't have those regulations or requirements in healthcare or any industry. And I think it's going to be absolutely critical that the federal government step in through a regulatory framework that makes sense.
Whenever I hear somebody say that regulation kills innovation, my response is that yes, it kills lazy, dirty, harmful innovation. And so we really do need a level playing field so that it's not up to someone's good graces as to whether or not they create AI that benefits everyone equally. I am very proud to say that I am a visiting AI fellow with NIST. I help contribute to the AI risk management framework. I believe that public-private collaboration is critical. And with the new US AI Safety Institute, I'm so excited to see what will be coming out of that. How do we think about, or how do we measure what is safe? We don't know, like in FDA or in medicine, we don't know what safe thresholds or tolerances are in terms of like toxicity or bias. It's impossible to make any AI system 100% bias free or 100% free of any toxicity. There are trade-offs in fairness. There are many different definitions of fairness, and you have to figure out which definitions are you going to work with because they often contradict each other. We just don't know. There aren't standards for that. And so my hope with the US AI Safety Institute is that we will be able to bring all of the best minds together from public, private, academia, nonprofit, everybody coming together and answering these different questions. And then we have really a strong foundation to work from.
So let me ask, I asked about the role of government, and that is, again, something we're actively thinking about. And you just mentioned, Kathy, public-private partnerships. This is something that is very much embedded in the president's executive order that you talked about, Jesse, this idea that we are all in this together and we all have a role to play in figuring out how do we, again, harness the vast positive potential of AI while curbing against the harms. But I hate for a conversation about workers to always feel like it's the anti-technology conversation. I don't think that's where we all are. So we talked about government. What is it that you think that industry could do that would help to bring about this world that I think we've all implied and saying that if we want technology to help create a more equitable world, a more fair world, a place where we don't leave people behind but everybody gets to benefit, what is it that you would like to see from industry to make that happen?
I would say that we have to be intentional, and if we're not very intentional in applying an equity lens to the development of these tools across industries, whether that's in healthcare from a patient-facing standpoint, or tools that are supporting sort of what folks are doing in a particular workflow, we will make things worse. We will exacerbate biases. We will exacerbate disparities, whether it's healthcare disparities or not. And so the AMA has been very, very aggressive in trying to promote that equity lens framework from an innovation standpoint. We have a set of coalitions across industries that are trying to sort of make that happen, but I think that that's something that is transferable across industries.
Just say one more sentence about equity, what you mean by that. Equity for who, equity in what way? Yeah,
so making sure that products and technologies are designed for all communities, that they're designed from people from those communities for those communities. If you look at just the venture capital dollars that are directed by people of color, it is a fraction of the people of color in this nation. We need to fix that. We need to make sure that we have tools and products and services that work for all people. And I could give you a very easy example of pulse oximeters. And folks know pulse oximeters are incredibly important tools. They're now used in consumer applications increasingly. There's a whole bunch of them across the way and downstairs. there is a problem around bias in pulse oximetry. We've known about this problem, which is that they overestimate oxygen level in people with dark skin tones. We've known about this problem for 30 years. It wasn't until the pandemic, and it was reported in journals that people were getting mistriaged. People were not going to the ICU. They were not getting oxygen. People of color, because of a calibration problem with this technology that we all assume works, has a problem. So we need to make sure that we don't allow that to happen, whether it's an AI product or any other medical device.
The Singaporean government recognized that many of these AI models developed in primarily the US, but also Western Europe, they're not as accurate for their own citizens, because we have genetic differences between us that can matter when it comes to medical outcomes. And so the Singaporean government created the largest genetic database of Southeast Asians to be able to train those models with. And this is something that governments can do, because in lieu of good data privacy laws, how do we go about providing data about ourselves in a way that we feel is safe and secure so that these AI predictions are equally accurate for everyone? Because right now it's not. Many AI models are based on those who have healthcare today. So it's primarily people who are quite affluent, that are able to go to doctors, get many of these tests done. And so being able to have good data sets, and the medical industry is one of them, but we can imagine language data sets, other types of data sets that are needed. We shouldn't, companies shouldn't just be scraping the web to get all of this stuff that's out there. It's also not necessarily representative of everyone. So in order to make any model better for any worker, having good representative data sets is critical to their success.
And I would suggest industry talk to your workers. Bring your workers to the table. And I think there's this perception, as you suggested, that workers are going to be the impediment, or it's going to be just this bury our head in the sand. We don't want new technology. Absolutely not the case. Workers have been evolving and changing with technology, and unions have been evolving and changing since our inception. And we have helped companies be successful through these transitions. And so I think we need more dialogue. I think that unions often are perceived as the enemy. We can stop traffic and go on strike, but we can also be solutions driven and actually be the ones who bring the frontline perspective and the experience about the work that actually makes this country hum. And so I think we need more opportunities like this where we have unlikely partners together on a stage or in a room, and that we pick each other's brains and we really deeply listen to each other and be solutions oriented.
Thank you. Well, besides being incredibly expert in each of your areas, you were also extremely succinct, and so we are going to end this panel exactly on time. I want to thank you, Kathy, Jesse, and Liz, for being part of this conversation, and say that this is a model of how we think that we can have the right conversations with different perspectives at the table, public, private, right, government, labor, industry, in order to try to imagine a world that we want to see so that AI can help bring us there. And I'll use your point, Liz, that we shouldn't just be creating things because we can. We should be asking what we should be doing, and I think that drives different investments and different outcomes. So I look forward to the continuing conversation and work with all of you, and thank you all so much for being here and listening.